This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Violence escalates between Israeli and Palestinian forces, leading to rocket attacks and airstrikes. Europe urged to support Italy over a migrant crisis. And Africa's dilemma as COVID-19 ravages India. Hello, welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Kenya suspends all flights with Somalia, citing operational sensitive information. And in sports, Tanzania's Simba embracing being this year's dark horse in the CAF Champions League. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's begin with developments in the Middle East, where health authorities in Gaza say at least 22 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Among the dead were 9 children. Israeli Defense Forces say the missiles were fired into Gaza in retaliation after Palestinians fired dozens of rockets close to Jerusalem. The latest escalation comes as hundreds were injured in clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, one of the reasons for the protests in Jerusalem is the Israeli plan to expel Palestinians from their homes in the district of Sheikh Jarrah. Now, it's part of a decades-long Israeli effort to consolidate its seizure of East Jerusalem. CGTN's Brian Dorman looks at some of the history.
Today's forecast, always sunny.
Sunny Jerusalem. These videos are from Israel's Ministry of Tourism. But behind the flash and glamour lies a complicated history. Today, Jerusalem is a divided city. Both Israel and the Palestinian Authority claim the city as their capital. But Jerusalem's legal status has been the subject of international debate for over 5 decades.
Entitled Status of Jerusalem.
In 1967, Israel fought what it calls the Six-Day War, seizing the east of the city from its rival Jordan.
Jerusalem. Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol must be the proudest man in the world.
Caught in the confusion, Palestinian families who lived in the area since the 1950s. Jordan's top diplomat says at that time, the United Nations made an agreement with the Jordanian government to house refugees who had been expelled from their traditional neighborhoods when the State of Israel was being formed. According to an Israeli NGO, the Civic Coalition for Palestinian Rights in Jerusalem, once Israel occupied the West Bank, authorities made it a point to transform occupied Palestinian East Jerusalem into a predominantly Jewish Israeli city. And in 1973, a group of ministers known as the Gaffney Committee drew up urban development plans with a strict demographic balance in mind. Critics call these and other Israeli policies discriminatory. But since virtually no progress has been made on the Jerusalem issue, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem remain victims of the status quo. Brian Dorman, CGTN.
Well, for more on this, let's cross live to Stephanie Freed, standing by in Jerusalem. Stephanie, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Stephanie, after the deadly night of violence, how are things looking today?
Well, there's certainly an escalation now between Gaza and Israel. That's where the focus is. The tension remains high in Jerusalem. The numbers that we have now are hundreds of rockets in the past 24 hours fired from Gaza onto Israeli cities. Around 130 Israel airstrikes on targets inside of Gaza. We're getting reports that 27 people have been killed in Gaza. In Israel, there are 30-some people, 31 people injured. There was one building at least that took a direct hit in southern Israel in the city of Ashkelon. by a rocket that was flown over or fired from Gaza. So this represents an escalation, but it shifts the focus now to Gaza, Israel. That's where the focus is now, and that's what people are looking at. Of course, Jerusalem can come back. There's the concern that if Jerusalem erupts again, certainly the concern on the Israeli side, that on multiple fronts there will be conflicts, violence, clashes, and that's going to demand multiple focal points in terms of dealing with the various hotspots.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. I believe you even answered my next question, but let me ask you, what are authorities officially saying in Israel at the moment regarding this escalation?
Well, Israel is saying that this will be an extended campaign, that they're going to keep hitting targets, they're going to keep hitting Gaza. And in fact, within the past half hour, the chief of staff, Israel's chief of staff, said strikes will continue. Israel is bolstering troops along the border with Gaza. Certainly there are international bodies that are trying to intervene, trying to get involved, trying to calm these tensions. The UN, Egypt, Qatar, they're trying to mediate between the sides, as well as the U.S. State Department, voicing concern. So as far as Israel's government is concerned, or this is what they're expressing, as long as the rockets keep firing from Gaza, they'll keep hitting Gaza. At the same time, from Gaza, the word is as long as Israel continues to maintain troops or border police on the Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem, they'll keep firing rockets.
All right, Stephanie Fareed, thank you for keeping a close eye on this story. We certainly appreciate the update. Now, the Arab League of States is holding an urgent meeting to discuss escalating tensions between Israel and Palestine. The session, which is being convened at the request of Palestine, is supported by a number of Arab countries. The Arab foreign ministers will discuss plans to force Palestinian families out of their homes, particularly in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. According to the Palestinian ambassador to Cairo and Palestine's permanent representative to the Arab League, the meeting will discuss the seriousness of the brutal attacks on worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Meanwhile, search and rescue efforts are continuing for at least 24 migrants feared dead after a boat capsized off the Libyan coast. Now, this is the latest disaster in the Mediterranean. The United Nations Refugee Agency says that about 42 survivors were returned to shore after the Monday incident. In a similar incident just one day before, 5 people drowned when a vessel carrying 45 Europe-bound migrants also capsized. Authorities reported 40 survivors were able to escape the disaster. The boat was among 9 that were carrying more than 700 migrants, and that were intercepted on Sunday by the Libyan Coast Guard. European countries need to show solidarity towards Italy after the arrival by boat of hundreds of migrants on the country's southern island of Lampedusa over the weekend. Now, this is according to the European Union's Home Affairs Commissioner. The EU's executive says that there is also need to support Italy with relocation of migrants. This is alongside comments on the same issue by the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency, Filippo Grandi. He expressed that Europe is in a position to easily manage hundreds of migrants arriving on its shores if it had more predictable state-led systems to deal with such matters. The two authorities agree that the region requires a mechanism that balances proper arrival arrangements and solidarity through relocation. All right, for more on the migrant situation, we are joined by Naeem Jina. He is currently the executive director of the Afro-Middle East Center, a research institute dedicated to studying the Middle East and North Africa relations between that region and the rest of Africa. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Well, we have seen a surge in migrants in the past couple of weeks. What is driving the surge in migrant numbers from your perspective?
Things. I think that one is, a large number of these migrants are from the African continent, and many of them are from places like Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, etc., where there have been particularly difficult political military situations in the past few months, and a large number of refugees as a result of that. So that's the one kind of factor. And another factor is that with the lockdowns in many countries, movement has been impeded over the past year or so, and so there's in a sense a kind of backlog of people that might have wanted to come from the middle of last year or wanted to go to Europe middle of last year and then have been backed up. And thirdly is that usually when the weather starts warming up in the north, you get an increase in the numbers. So that factor together with the other two means that we've seen the past few months, 2 or 3 months, a huge increase in numbers compared to, let's say, last year, the year before. I think about 13,000 since the beginning of this year until today.
All right. Naeem, the EU executive says member states should help Italy with migrant relocation. Is there any action towards this so far?
Well, there doesn't seem to be any action, and EU member states generally seem happier to just sit back and not get involved in it. Clearly, what they do by such an action is make it seem like there actually is a crisis. But according to the UNHCR, there isn't a crisis. That Europe is quite easily able to absorb these migrants, move them around within EU, and take care of them without creating the sense of a crisis. Creating the sense that there is a crisis allows them to put the blame for everything onto the migrants themselves, make it seem as if they are swamped and overloaded and all of that. And of course, what's even more convenient for the EU is that the first port of call for many of these migrants is Italy, Lampedusa, the island that belongs to Italy. And Italy has a particularly right-wing anti-immigrant government. In fact, the Interior Ministry was last month, the court decided that he can be charged for kidnapping for preventing a ship from landing. So it's kind of convenient for many of the other EU member states to allow Italy to be in the kind of front line of this, while the reality is that it's not a crisis. Migrants can arrive and can be absorbed into European society much more easily than they are pretending they can.
All right, Naeem, that brings me to my final question. Compelling statements that you've made there, by the way. Enlighten us, how do countries navigate the migrant crisis, especially now during the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, the pandemic, of course, makes things more difficult. It makes things more difficult both for the receiving countries as well as the migrants themselves and, whichever countries they are coming from and countries that they are passing through. We often talk about the difficulties for the receiving countries, but it's the migrants that are really the ones that are in crisis. But again, in terms of what the UNHCR has said around the issue of the migrants arriving in Italy over the past couple of months, that yes, it is a challenge with the pandemic, but these challenges can easily be met by Europe if they plan properly and they put proper mechanisms into place. There isn't a great enthusiasm in Europe to put such mechanisms into place, and that's the problem.
All right, Naeem Nta, Executive Director, Afro-Middle East Center, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Now, let's turn our attention to Libya. More than 100 children, most without their parents, were intercepted off the coast of Libya this past week, and that's according to the United Nations Children's Fund. Dangerous overseas crossing attempts to reach Europe has left over 1,000 foreign children in detention centers in Libya. Yasser Hakim spoke with the UNICEF regional spokesperson Julia Tuma about the latest efforts to deal with the migrant crisis.
We do know that there are many migrants in Libya, among them many children, and most of them are living in detention centers under very, very harsh conditions, with very limited access to basic services, including water and hygiene, let alone health and education. And what we are saying is that the Libyan authorities should, first of all, release all migrant children from detention and refugee children as well, because the detention of migrants and refugees should not happen. Putting children in detention centers is not a solution. I mean, these children have not done anything wrong, or certainly haven't committed crimes, and so putting them in detention should not happen. And in fact, they should be released.
Has the UNICEF and international community done enough to solve this problem?
This is a caseload of children that UNICEF has been following for many years now with regards to migrants and refugees in Libya. We are committed to helping the Libyan government in providing services to those children while they're in detention, but ideally when they get out of detention. And it's not just the responsibility of the Libyan authorities alone, it's the responsibilities of the Europeans, all the countries who are on the central Mediterranean should also help trace those children who come to their shores, to rescue them, because the journey is one of the deadliest in the world.
What is being done by the UNICEF to try and reunite the children with their families?
For us, it was any child is a child too many, but 114 is a huge number, and unaccompanied as well. These are the vulnerable of the vulnerable. Try to track down those children's mothers, fathers, any first-hand relatives. So yes, that is something that is ongoing. Whether we would be successful or not, I don't know. It is premature to say. Meanwhile, we will continue to focus on helping these children. The children have arrived indeed to Sicily, and they are being assisted there not only by UNICEF but also by local authorities.
Thank you very much for joining us.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news. Here's what's ahead. Africa's dilemma as COVID-19 ravages India. And IGAD says South Sudan faces the worst food security crisis in recent years.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Djibouti, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Thanks for sticking with us. Let's turn our attention to China, where the country has released the numbers from its latest census. The country's population stands at 1.41 billion, up by over 5% from a decade ago. The shares of young people and seniors both saw growth, but births have been falling in recent years and the population is aging. The working population has seen a 6% decline, raising concerns for the government. The average age in China stands at 38.8. Officials say these numbers overall reveal the population has been growing more slowly over the past decade.
The census shows that China's population growth has slowed over the past decade. The average annual growth rate was 0.53%, 0.04 percentage point lower than the previous decade. That is a result of multiple factors and a natural result of China's economic and social development, especially in the process of industrialization and urbanization. In the future, at some point, China's population will peak, but there are still uncertainties. For some time to come, China's total population will be capped at above 1.4 billion.
South Sudan is facing one of the worst food security crises globally, and this is according to the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. A report by its Food Security and Nutrition Working Group says that an estimated 7.2 million people, which is 60% of the country's population, are expected to face acute food shortages between now and July. The report released on Monday also says conflict and widespread flooding are the key drivers of food scarcity in the country. IGAD is also concerned that despite the dire situation on the ground, the humanitarian response remains largely underfunded. South Sudan is still emerging from the ruins of a civil war, with President Salva Kiir dissolving parliament on Sunday to pave the way for the appointment of lawmakers from formerly warring parties in the country. In Somalia, floods have displaced hundreds of people and destroyed large areas of farmland with newly sown crops. This comes after the Shabelle Rivers burst its banks in the villages of Bare and Moiko near the city of Jowhar. Jowhar is on the verge of being submerged as the road between the city and the airport has been cut off. The floods come from Ethiopian highlands, although these regions experienced a shortage of rains since the beginning of the current spring season. The flooding of the Shabelle River has also destroyed hundreds of hectares of arable land for sesame, maize, and vegetables in the region. Floods hit the riverine regions of the Shabelle River every year, causing displacement and food insecurity.
The floods have caused a lot of damage and displacements. Many villages have been evacuated, many farms have been destroyed, and now the whole town is under siege. There is no place for our livestock, vegetables and crops, and the road between the city and the airport is cut off.
Today, the central town of Jowhar is on the verge of the huge floods. Now the flood is flowing to Kulud village east of Jowhar town, and then it will likely hit a lake on the sides of Isnai farms. And the farms will rebound after hitting the lake, and it will hit back the city. So we urge the administration of the city to take the necessary precautions to control the water. The floods damaged a lot of our crops we recently planted. We're facing food insecurity. I have lost 2 farms, a potato and vegetable farms.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a female peacekeeper and 5 other villagers have been reported dead after a suspected rebel attack on a UN military camp. The 28-year-old peacekeeper from Malawi was killed at the Kilia base in the Beni region. Authorities blaming the violence on the Allied Democratic Forces, which operates in the eastern part of the country. The ADF is an Islamist group with Ugandan origins, allegedly linked to Islamic State. In response to the deteriorating security situation in the region, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi last week declared a state of siege in Ituri and North Kivu province. A military administration has now taken over governance from civilian authorities in the 2 provinces.
I launch a vibrant appeal to my brothers and sisters that we have arrived, and that during this state of siege that you surrender and we will receive you unconditionally.
A state of siege has been targeted in Ituri and North Kivu, but why not also add South Kivu, where people are killing each other? South Kivu should not be dismissed or limited, and even in other provinces. So you see that in Congo, politicians are really at the service of armed groups.
We hope that the new military governor will fight hard for insecurity in our city and in the entire province of North Kivu. If he will respond to the insecurity, we will agree with him.
Staying in the Democratic Republic of Congo, officials are reporting the presence of the COVID-19 variant first detected in India. This comes after the country announced the redeployment of 1.3 million surplus AstraZeneca vaccines. African nations are also concerned over a long-running shortfall in vaccines as India continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. India is one of the biggest suppliers of the AstraZeneca vaccine distributed under the COVAX program that helps immunize poorer countries. India announced at the end of March that it was delaying overseas supplies as it works to meet its own needs. The country is now recording over 22 million cases and a death toll of nearly 250,000. The virus variant wreaking havoc in India has already been detected in several African countries, notably Kenya, South Africa, and Uganda.
Nous pouvons dire aujourd'hui We can say today that 25 cases came back positive out of 146 people, of which 18 were of Indian nationality and 7 of Congolese nationality. Among the 25 positive cases, there are 5 Indian variants, the result of a double mutation of the British variant and the South African variant. But the situation is calm at the clinical level. There is also no fear, so the population should be reassured because all measures have been taken. To date, we have decided to increase tracing, that is, the testing of people coming from high-risk countries by imposing 2 controls, one on arrival and a second on the 7th day.
Authorities in South Africa's Western Cape province are working to register citizens ahead of its vaccination rollout program for over 60. The province currently has the highest number of COVID-related deaths in the country. Although the number of new cases of COVID-19 are said to be stabilized, the race is on to register older adults who are among the most vulnerable. Renee Delcarme reports.
For most people living in South Africa's townships, the COVID-19 crisis has meant increased poverty and hunger. For others, like 64-year-old Margaret Tonzi, it has brought a heightened sense of sadness and fear.
I was feeling sad. The way the people that they were getting sick, and I did see with my own eyes, and the way the people that they were dying with this coronavirus.
The grandmother of 8 was among a group of older adults registering for the COVID-19 jab. Using cell phone technology, the over 60s were signed up by the Western Cape Health Minister, nurses and community health workers.
I'm coming now to register for this injection so that I must not catch this coronavirus because I am really frightened for it.
For us, our headache is the vulnerable, the 60-plus-year-olds that needs to be vaccinated, 752,000. We need to make sure that the people who normally clog our health system, which is the older persons, who also normally have got other chronic conditions, have to be vaccinated. The vaccination starts from 17 May, and then for the 60-plus-year-olds, at least by the end of June, we're supposed to have vaccinated all of them.
The minister said her province aimed to vaccinate over 250,000 people over the age of 60 in the next month and a half. But less than a quarter of them had registered so far.
It was only 24% of the elderly persons who have registered. It is worrisome, so that's why now we have to make sure we go to the people and find those older persons, especially those who might not have access to register.
Most of the elderly people here at the Masimanyane Center say they suffer from comorbidities such as diabetes, asthma and high blood pressure, and say they've been extremely fearful of contracting COVID-19, but feel a bit more hopeful now that their names have finally been entered into South Africa's electronic vaccination data system.
You are successfully registered. Thank you so much.
Health officials are calling on the people of the Western Cape to unite and vaccinate, saying no one in the province is safe until most of them, young and old, are vaccinated. Renee Delcarme, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, let's cross to the UK now, where politicians there are currently preparing for the opening of the new parliamentary session. Queen Elizabeth is due to arrive in Parliament, where she is expected to deliver a speech that lays out the government agenda. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised a skills revolution. The news continues on Africa Live. We've got your business segment coming up next. Don't go away. Here's a look at what's ahead. Kenya suspends all flights with Somalia, citing operational sensitive information. The biggest U.S. gas line pipeline attacked by shadowy criminal network.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Welcome back to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. Kenya has suspended all flights to Somalia, citing a security directive. The move is expected to be in effect for 3 months from Tuesday. According to Kenya's Civil Aviation Authority, only medical evacuation and United Nations flights on humanitarian missions will be allowed between the two countries. This comes barely 5 days after Somalia said it had restored diplomatic ties with Kenya. Flights from Somalia passing through Kenyan airspace to another destination will, however, be exempted. And civil servants in Nigeria may soon have to contend with pay cuts. This after the country's finance minister announced that the government was planning to review payrolls to slash the rising expenditure. CGTN's Kelechi Emekolom reports on the implications of this directive.
A policy dialogue on the cost of governance in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Reducing government spending is at the core of conversations here. Government says its expenditure increased to a terrain twice higher than its revenue, and workers' salaries is a target to cut costs.
The President has directed that a salaries committee that I chair works together with the head of service and other members of the committee to review the government payroll with a view of cutting down on cost.
Nigeria's cost of governance is reported to be one of the most expensive in the world. Among other things, budgets are characterized by repetitive expenditure and inflated costs. The anti-corruption agency, the ICPC, says it's one of the drivers of corruption in the West African nation. For economic watchers, the problem goes beyond civil servants' salaries.
We spent over 50% of our internally revenue on frivolities and recurrent expenditures within the government system or in the public sector. The National Assembly comprises of two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, with over 400 members doing what? And they get a budgetary allocation of 150 billion naira per annum. The greed of the political class is what drives this high cost of governance. And that is why somebody knows that he has 400 staff, but he's paying 800 staff.
We need to really identify that the places we want to cut our costs from are the necessary places, but not the places that will cause more poverty for its citizens. If the cut is only going to be on salaries of workers, it's not going to have any impact. The only time it will have an impact is if they cut the right places. Security votes, we have to cut down on them. We have to talk about remove completely the issues of constituency projects.
Economists want government to build models of accountability in the Nigerian system, say it would help the country close corruption gaps and optimize revenue management. Kelechi Emekolom, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Restaurants, stores, and malls in Egypt will close early in a bid to help contain a surge in COVID-19 cases. Large gatherings and concerts will also be banned for 2 weeks as the country approaches the last days of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and Eid celebrations. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more on this report from Cairo.
The latest partial closure is a reflection of the steady rise in COVID-19 cases over the last 2 months in the North African state. Authorities have warned Egyptians had been relaxing health precautions lately.
We commend the government for this decision. Many places were packed with people either shopping or gatherings at outings and parties during Ramadan have increased. Symptoms of the virus were known and clear to us, but now the symptoms have changed. In a lot of cases, there's no high temperature. The lungs can be infected without the patient feeling it at first, and other symptoms manifest in the digestive system, in the eyes and ears. So it's becoming tricky but dangerous because you do not notice it's a coronavirus infection until it's too late.
Though the situation has been worsening, the government had refrained from an all-out closure. This is in a bid to protect its economy from the pandemic-induced slowdown.
At the onset of the coronavirus pandemic last year, we adopted a partial closure followed by a full closure and curfew in the first quarter of 2020. This led to a 1.5 economic contraction for the first time since 2011. We are learning from the past experience by adopting only a partial closure for now to have the least effect on the economy.
Tourism, a main source of foreign currency, has been hard hit by restrictions imposed to curb the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why hotels and private beaches were exempt from the early closure. But the tourism ministry has upgraded health procedures and has been sanitizing hotels, tourist sites and museums. Maintaining a balance between health measures and economic stability is a main factor for the government at this stage.
I believe the negative economic effects will be minute during the third wave. The GDP numbers are normal so far. We are entering the summer season. Last June, July and August, we saw a significant drop in infection rates. We are at the same period during into the summer, so I think the third wave will be contained quicker than last year.
Meanwhile, health authorities are working hard to curb the spread of the virus.
Adoption of health measures and vaccinations is the way out. Countries that have inoculated a high number of their citizens have seen a drop in infection rates. At this point, our main option is sticking to health measures. Everyone must deal with others as if they are infected and take the necessary precautions. We have to take the vaccine. Many are refusing in fear of side effects, but there's no alternative. We must all get vaccinated at a short period of time so that the chances of infections will drop.
The government hopes the closure of the restaurants, malls, and the ban on mass gatherings and weddings would prevent a further spread of the pandemic, especially during the Eid festivities. The government had set the closure until the mid of May. However, it has warned that if the number of cases does not go down, it will be extended until June. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The biggest U.S. gasoline pipeline will not resume full operations for several more days following a ransomware attack blamed on a shadowy criminal network called DarkSide. The attack is one of the most disruptive digital ransom schemes ever reported. Nathan King with more.
Well, it's something out of a movie, but it's actually real life, and this has been happening more and more. Essentially, Colonial Energy over the weekend realized that it had a ransomware breach, and it's a big deal because it essentially supplies about 2.5 million barrels a day of energy between the Gulf of Mexico coast all the way up to the ports that supply New York and lots of states in between. What's interesting is that they have said that they did not consult the government cybersecurity experts, suggesting that they may have been negotiating with the ransomware company. Did they pay a ransom? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But President Joe Biden was briefed all over the weekend. He's changed some rules, allowing truckers to move energy for longer hours up the East Coast. Let's listen to President Joe Biden.
We have efforts underway with the FBI and DOJ, Department of Justice, to disrupt and prosecute ransomware criminals.
Now, the FBI announced that they believe it's DarkSide, this hacking consortium based in Eastern Europe. A lot of people are pointing the finger at Russia, although Joe Biden said they have nothing in the intelligence to actually link it to a nation state like Russia at the moment. And DarkSide have targeted many companies before, essentially for money. The Homeland Security chiefs are on it. Let's listen to them.
Currently, we assess DarkSide as a criminal actor, but of course, our intelligence community is looking for any ties to any nation-state actors, and if we find that further information, we'll look into it further.
But the economic damage is the real question here. With that amount of energy off, the company does say it's basically re-established links to states along the way of the pipeline to provide fuel. That includes Tennessee, Georgia, elsewhere. But gas prices, oil prices have gone up at the petrol pump here, nearly $3 a gallon. I know that doesn't sound a lot to the rest of the world, but here in the US, it's a big deal. Energy is pretty cheap. And it comes at a time when, of course, the economic recovery has been seen to be faltering slightly. We had a terrible jobs report with only 200,000 jobs created for last month. Economists were expecting 1 million. Joe Biden's administration under pressure from all sides. He says, look, we are working on this new infrastructure plan. They're also targeting, by the way, cybersecurity as well when it comes to these sorts of attacks. But a lot of Republicans have said essentially because it's been pumping too much money into the economy, giving people unemployment benefits and checks in their mail, people don't want to get back to work. Well, he rejects that and says the amount of Americans unemployed by COVID-19 needed a strong response. Let's take a listen.
22 million people lost their jobs in this pandemic through no fault of their own. They lost their jobs to a virus and to a government that bungled its response to the crisis and failed to protect them.
But of course, when it comes to a Colonial Energy Pipeline being hit, this is one of these so-called black swans that hit administrations while they're planning for other things. They had hoped that this week they could talk to Republicans about the economy, the infrastructure plan, the other plans as well, the American Families Plan, all of which, another $4 trillion of stimulus to the economy spending. There's a lot of resistance politically, and how they handle this ransomware attack and, of course, the geopolitical ramifications, if it does, for example, start to point the finger at Russia, could take their eye off the ball domestically. What's very interesting about this is how the company Colonial is going to react. Did they pay something? How quickly are they going to get back online? And also, what are the threats to other parts of US and also global infrastructure? This is not just a US problem going forward, and unless it's tackled by the international community, it's only going to get worse. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Iraq has formally asked to buy U.S. energy giant ExxonMobil's share in one of Iraq's biggest oil fields, Western Kurna 1. Director of state-run Basra Oil Company, Khalid Hamza, told Reuters that Exxon was seeking to sell the 32.7% stake at $350 million. The sale marks a shift for Exxon, which in 2019 looked poised to move ahead with a $53 billion project to boost Iraq's oil output.
We sent a formal letter to ExxonMobil asking to buy its share through the Basra Oil Company, and now we are dealing with the ministry to prepare the support for this. The Ministry of Oil and the Ministry of Finance are committed with us to securing financing for these shares, because this is not only about buying shares, but also about the participation in payment of operating costs, production management, and the development of the field.
Time now for a short break, but there is a lot more coming your way on Africa Live. Here's what's ahead. Plant lovers flock to Cairo's Spring Flower Festival amid COVID-19 health restrictions.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. After canceling it last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Egypt decided to hold its Spring Flowers exhibition this year. The annual event is the biggest display of decorative plants and flowers in the country. With health restrictions in place this year, thousands joined the festival, which aims to encourage citizens to grow more plants. Here's Adel El Mahroui with more on that story.
On a 28-acre park in the heart of the Egyptian capital, Cairo once again welcomes plant lovers from across the country. Last year, the event coincided with Egypt's first COVID-19 lockdown, so it got cancelled. This year, health measures have been implemented so as not to deprive visitors from this unique opportunity to become acquainted with the latest trends in flowers and decorative plants.
This is my first time attending this event. My family and I thought it would be a good idea to come after these long months of the lockdown. The flowers look lovely and we are really enjoying this. We need this kind of break from the tension that we're living in because of the pandemic.
This year, the government's Center for Agricultural Research participated to enrich the experience of young growers in a step that aims to expand what the government says is a promising field in the agricultural sector.
Flowers and decorative plants are booming businesses. There's demand for shade, outdoor or home garden plants. This rising industry gets exported. This fair aims to support this industry. It's also an opportunity for people to have a change of scenery in this magnificent park.
More than 238 exhibitors displayed their products this year. This colorful festival is one of the biggest exposures they get to the public all year. Tens of thousands usually attend the event, which is marking its 88th edition.
I have been participating in this festival for 14 years because all producers come here. It turned into a competition. Some people try to cultivate new plants or designs. Others don't. I'm keen to display the best I have, not only to sell to people, but to show others what I am capable of. This kind of competition develops the industry a lot.
We try to bring the biggest possible collection to enrich this artistry display of nature. At the same time, we try to introduce a wide range of prices so plants can be affordable to all kinds of visitors. I see people who love plants and adore their beauty, but their financial capabilities are limited.
Prices for a plant starts as low as 30 US cents. They can go up to thousands of dollars depending on the age, quality and rarity of the plant. Adil Mahoui, CGTN, Cairo.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headline. In sports, Tanzania's Simba embracing being this year's dark horse in the CAF Champions League.